Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to beautiful Commerce, Texas, and our 19th annual Cotton Belt Regional Railroad Symposium. I had no idea I'd be talking numbers that high when we started this thing back in the day, but here we are. A few of you have been around for most of that time. We got a few new people. And sadly, we've lost a few along the way. I think we have. I think our presenters are always great. And they do a great job, and I think we got another good lineup for you again this year. There will be coffee. It's time tied. They're tracking some down for us and transferring around and whatever all they do. We should have some short. There is tea and water. Well, our first presenter is no stranger to the group. If you're online, you know him very, very well. He's the guy with all the information, and thankfully he's willing to share. It's always fascinating when he digs up and sees the brain. He's always willing to put together a program or programs. I had to kind of put him off on programs because he's got so many. We had to kind of pick and choose. He wanted to do about 10 Texas Teeters, and he had took the other topics there. And so next year's the big 20. Says why don't we say that and just celebrate big? You can have the 20 Texas Teeters next year. So we'll see if we can pull that together. Our first presentation is our friend Dennis Hogan from Frisco. It's an Austin and Northwestern photo gallery. And I will turn the mics over to him. I think you're ready to go with the presentation. You want to be up here or down there or where?
All right, thank you, Jason. Appreciate you hosting this for yet another year. Also, thank you to the university for sponsoring this event for another year. So, hopefully this little presentation will be short, it's only 16 slides. I want to preface it by saying that 30 years ago, I went up to Denison, Texas, to visit the then Katy Railroad Museum, which was in the depot at that time. And they had a number of binders of material, various kinds of material. And so I kind of pawed through some of those binders just to see what they had. And lo and behold, in binder number 13, oddly enough, there was what I consider a mother lode of vintage photographs of the Austin and Northwestern, pre-1900. I ended up telling a friend of mine who worked for the Georgetown Railroad, still does, about him, invited him up one time. He came and saw him. He must have spread the word. Eventually, most of these photos ended up in the Journal of Texas Shortlines, the issue they had on the Austin Northwestern. So if you think you've seen these before, you probably have. But they're so rare and so vintage that I thought it was worthwhile to revisit them again in a presentation. By the way, I don't think I stole this pass from Jimmy Barlow or Ken Stavinoha. I'll claim it as my own. Yeah, you can check it out. Well, I see it's copyrighted, so. All right. All right, just a quick history of the Austin Northwestern. Incorporated in 1881, it got built from Austin to Abilene. Of course, it never even got close to Abilene. It was built originally as narrow gauge, at least to burn it. Not quite sure if it actually built beyond burn it. It's possible that it might have gone as far as Marble Falls as narrow gauge, but the later extension up to Llano, I'm pretty sure, from what I can tell, was a standard gauge railroad. And then, of course, in 1891, the entire railroad was made standard gauge. There's quite a bit of granite in that area, and some of that granite was hauled by the railroad for the construction of the state capitol. There was one spur going off to an iron reservoir called Bessemer. It's about just a few miles outside of Atlanta, Texas. Didn't last too long. 1901, the Houston, Texas Central, and the Austin Northwestern merged together. And then later on, the H&TC built an extension from Burnett to Lampasas. All right, first slide here. This is the general office building of the Austin and Northwestern. I think it's on the second or third floor of that building. That building was actually owned by the First National Bank. I did a little research. That building existed at 6th and Congress in Austin. Trying to give you an idea of where it was. Shot here of locomotive number 1. Now, as I said before, most of these photos are taken from that collection that was in the Katy Historical Society, now called the Red River Rail Museum in Denison. They've moved to a different location. They're no longer in the depot anymore. Anyway, most of these shots from that collection were taken in about 1893. So this was after the Austin Northwestern had been converted to standard gauge. So here we have standard gauge locomotive number 1 in a roundhouse, which I'm pretty sure was in Austin. I had to do a little research. Okay, this was not Austin Northwestern number 1. This is H&TC locomotive number 1. If you look at the steam dome right in front of the cab, you can actually see the crescent and star emblem of the Houston, Texas Central. So what my research uncovered was that number 1 was originally number 72, and then renumbered at some point to number 1. And if that research is correct, locomotive number 72 was at one time named Ebenezer Allen, the second locomotive by that name. Okay. There was an earlier one, and this apparently was, name was carried over to this locomotive. Union Depot in Austin. Some of you may think, well, wait a minute, that's the IGN Depot in Austin. Yes, it is, but it also served as a union depot for the HNTC and the Austin and Northwestern. This was located, I think, in the southwest corner of 3rd and Commerce. HTC locomotive number 71. The crew. Not sure what the location is. All right, here's a photo of a kiln on the line somewhere. My guess is, okay, isn't there still a kiln today at McNeil or near McNeil? I think so, or at least there was until recent times. I guess this is probably the kiln that was at near McNeil.
I think that Austin White Line sold recently and was shut down.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's been there for
Forever, yeah.
And they supposedly had a new buyer, so everybody's wondering if it has a future yet.
Okay, all right.
Right now it's shut down and out of business.
This could be the
It's
same.
probably, this is probably a predecessor.
Yeah, probably the same location. Cummings Station. I had to look up on a map where this was because I had never heard of Cummings. It's the station just past McNeil as you go west on the line. And apparently it didn't last long because it disappeared from schedules pretty early on. Leander, shot of the depot there with the passenger train. Liberty Hill. I admire how clean, the garden area is around the depot. Spotless. No trash. Well planted. Which was typical of that area. Depots oftentimes had gardens. Now this is from a different collection. This is from the Austin Public Library collection. Okay. You notice it's more of a sepia tone photograph. Somewhere near Burnett. Okay, Fairland Station. Fairland is west of Burnett. There was a junction there, and you can tell that by the separation of the two lines there. A train on each side of the depot. One line goes further west to Kingsland and Llano. The other line goes down to Granite Mountain and Marble Falls. I believe there's still a Y there today.
There is, the line is still there.
Okay. All right, nearby, also in Fairland is an online business, always kiln and pecan polisher. First time I've heard of a pecan polisher, but here we have evidence of that kind of an operation. Pecan polisher. I'm just reading the script. Yeah, that's what it says on the side.
You gotta buff them down.
Yeah. That's right. I'm sure it's some variety that gets buffed down.
Do they polish the pecan shell or the pecan after you take it out?
Good question. We need to go back in time and figure out which one it is. Beat by the Sherman and the Wayback Machine.
Isn't there a con that's called a burn?
A Barnett? Could be. Okay, Slaughter Gap. This is just south of Fairland on the way to Granite Mountain and Marble Falls is this ridge here called Slaughter Gap. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with your eyesight. That pole really is crooked. I've stared at that for minutes on end, and yeah, it's a crooked pole. Marble Falls Station. Okay, that was a step-in station, which still exists. It's either a Chamber of Commerce or they have their own little transit, community transit. And this is the headquarters for transit. It's been relocated, of course. This is this location and where the current depot is are two different places. Again, this is an Austin Public Library photo. All right, Granite Mountain. This is where the granite for state capitol came from. It's still working today. It's still a working mining operation. That dome of granite there is not quite as intact as it was in this this photo. And this photo I found on Portal to Texas History. But I'm guessing it's probably also an Austin Public Library photo. Strangely enough, we don't know who the photographer was for any of these photos. There's no record of who actually took them. But it's you know, if you compare Texas to like Colorado, where there's just a myriad of photos taken back in the 1800s, this is a real treasure trove of the early Texas Railroad. You don't find too many photos of this quality. All right, if you continue on from Fairland westward, eventually you'll get to Backbone Mountain. There's a rather spectacular drive today around the edge of Backbone Mountain. There's a very nice scenic view of the Colorado River, lakes, and so forth. All right. Near Kingsland somewhere. I'm sure Kingsland back then was not anywhere near as developed as it is today. Again, another Austin Public Library photograph. The Antlers Inn. So in 1901, the Austin and Northwestern, now under the control or merged with the Houston Texas Central, built this hotel in Kingsland, kind of a resort hotel, get away from Austin and so forth. And it still exists today. It's well worth a visit, if not a overnight stay. They have, in addition to the old hotel, they have three cabooses you can stay in. They have an old passenger car you can stay in, and they have a depot, of course, for a much greater price per night. And by the way, inside this Antlers Inn, if you go into what was once probably the kitchen area or dining area, there's a rather formidable looking Houston Texas Central iron stove still there. Probably too heavy to carry out of there. By the way, are there any tired people in here yet? You're tired already? Jason's right. We're almost to the end. All right.
None of this.
Okay. I was going to suggest to you go make a reservation at the Antlers Inn if you're tired.
I'm not just tired, I'm just reading.
Oh, retired. A lot of us folks here. Okay. All right. Photo quality is not that great, but I wanted to show this anyway. The station just outside of Atlanta, Texas, a few miles, where there was a spur to a iron mining operation, as you could probably figure out from the name Bessemer. That whole area down there in Atlanta was a geologist's paradise. there is quite an array of various minerals in that area. In fact, in 1970, took a field trip. It was a National Science Foundation field trip sponsored by SMU. It's a geology thing. We took a bus trip down there and stayed at the old hotel in Llano and went to various locations to find fossils and minerals and so forth. So, yeah, a lot of fun. All right, this is a miscellaneous photo. I have no idea where it came from. Anyway, it shows the original depot in Llano for the passenger train. There's a replica depot there today with a museum inside of it. Okay, reportedly the first train into Llano, Texas. That container on that flat car, some of you may know better than I do. I've heard of containers of brine shipped in containers like that. But any ideas what else it could be? Could be fresh water, I guess.
That was a standard SP water car.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, they used them all over Nevada.
Okay, all right. I guess that predates what, tank cars? Probably, yeah. Bird's eye view of Llano Yard. You can see the bridge. It goes over across the river to the main part of the town. Bridge there today, of course, is much more modern than this one.
Which way are we looking?
We are looking south toward the town. Yard in the foreground. Depot would be off to the left. Tracks go a little bit further to the right, not too much further. Another shot of another HMTC locomotive in Llano, Texas. Notice a lot of the buildings are stone construction, which makes sense, given the location. That flat car with LW is Louisiana Western, part of the Texas and Louisiana lines. All right, this slide legitimizes this entire presentation. Any guesses why?
Because it says why.
Well, think about the defining characteristics of presentations for this symposium. It has to do with cotton. Okay, so what do you see there on the loading dock? Bales of cotton. So I squeaked this presentation in based on the fact that I had something to do with cotton. Because to be honest with you, I never realized that this area of Texas would even grow cotton until I saw that. It's not the stereotypical place for cotton growing, at least I thought. So again, you get the Llano Depot, water tower. You can see part of the Y there to the left. You see something interesting?
Where are we looking in this one?
We're looking, I think,
Imagine that today, where the depot sits now.
yeah.
Isn't it on the other side? I mean, on the right of this picture?
Yeah. We're looking west, excuse me, east in this photograph. Yeah.
Plus, yeah, the wire goes to the north, so
Yeah.
that's still in place.
And the depot is on the north side,
Depot's on the north side of the track,
So
yeah.
that one is there.
I mean, of the river.
Yes, correct.
Down the north side.
Yeah. River to be
I've been
over.
there once, and that was in 1980.
Yeah. River is to your right there in the photograph. It's off the screen here, off the picture. All right. to call these guys the Depot Rottos. What do you think? You think that's a fitting name for that crew who got the Depot Rottos? You see yourself in that picture, Myron?
Yeah, probably the third guy from the left.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking the same thing. All right. All right. Well, thank you very much. I told you it was a short program.
Great shows, fascinating. That is a great right there.
Yeah.
That was, most of you I'm sure know from being here before, there are often technical issues that require delays, so I'm trying to put sufficient gaps so we can get the next program loaded and going and maybe stay somewhere close to schedule. So, we're a little ahead right now, which is a good thing. Have a short intermission and we'll get the next program loaded up here and ready to go. We can visit and look at the displays, and then there is our coffee over here, if you're so inclined. And steaming water and get some squirt in it and shaking it and whatever you want to do with it. So, and we'll be right back.
Yeah. Five.
Big day.
No, so they told us like three, yeah. They really was talking about this. So he was sold. 8 years I don't know what like. They still operate their business. Yes. And I presume that they moved over, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, so, Paul, where's the money for this? We don't know. They really did a great job. Yeah. They contacted us. Get us in these photos, and we want to try to be accurate as we can, obviously with ADA, you know, to make this a meaningless. They had to make some changes to it. We really wanted to try to do something disrupt as much as we can. So, anyway, it's up and running. They've had some stuff in it. It's a good hand, so.
It wasn't Brad, it was another story. We were all kind of. Yeah, I can see it maybe. Sure.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
No, I didn't make.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes.
All of the silver things are made here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I've been in there, they had a grand opening. And so I don't remember seeing that. There was some stuff in there, some of the bills collection. And long-term lid, you know, we got some, that bill had a couple of copies there. But anyway, it's in really good hands. Well, they had just opened this year. And I think the sale went down something last year. And then they got it in the end of last year. Sounds like a yeah, I mean, Blacklands, or Blacklands, previous owner, had, you know, they put ramps in, probably meet city code. But they didn't have to do a whole lot of hauling. They just made it more of a, you know, because Blacklands had that back screws, you know, oil shop, cutting torches, all this. Well, you know, they've added some kitchen facilities. It's appropriate for meeting practice. It's in hand. We'll see what happens. I would call their office is right now. It's just west of Church Street. So Church Street is main road to where the depot is. Main Street west is Davis. All of those are right there, just off the tracks. Rosemary Hall is she's the mother. Her daughter's mom too. Roseberry's a big home. I'm sure she would. Yeah, it's a really good. They've done a good job with it. In fact, they were doing some window work on it this week. I noticed they resealed the windows, but anyway, it's real proud. You know, our downtown is incredible. And there's many places downtown. Biggest crowds, roads. So this is just, you know, 2 blocks north of downtown. They have all kinds of events there. Yeah, so you know, it's yeah. No, when they floated that idea, they were trying to buy it. Great. So, yeah. Oh, you did?
Yard sale going on. Last week, that was a picture, this hideous little picture we had out there. Like frames. So a lot of anything, but I guess it doesn't matter. You see imaginary.
Social media presence. This is Silver Street.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They have. Yeah,
So many towns. Yeah.
No, it really is. I mean, it's yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's the operator trailer receiver came through the wall. They've done really good. You can see cosmetically they, you know, cleaned up. Like I said, we're doing some window work this week. They're redoing the windows, repainting, resealing. We're not sure.
That's it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. This is Rayburn. This is her daughter. They're all partners in whatever. Really the drive course. They were a customer. They're right there by the track. They used to get more.
First started coming,
Her husband. Yeah, they were all distributors. Yeah. They used to provide diesel type work.
Self-inflicted.
Yeah, he used to build a store to uploads up there. So they, they have a kind of a preservation mindset. They have a love for the yeah, no, it's a good yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah, that'd be a really good place. It'd be ideal. Yeah. 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 They just got named Texas Monthly top walking place in the state. Well, they're just southwest of the square, kind of behind the police station on one of the side streets. And they're only open. They do like Tuesday through Sunday, 11 to 7. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Decided to rename that.
No, I think it's a good idea.
Baker.
No,
Yeah. We're gonna put a big sign out, the Eldon Baker. Anyway. So you know that there were two Ebenezer Allen working with? Really? Okay. Oh, the one Allen. Yeah.
Isn't that that's what, 1974?
Yeah, there's probably about 3 or 4 of them around. One of them went, well, maybe 2 of them went to Grand Canyon Railroad. One of those came, I don't know if that's the one that Allen got or one that Allen got. Okay. Yeah, there were about 3 or 4 of those.
Did they ever actually operate on the train?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, they were first steamer. They had one on display, and then they had one that was not. Yeah, they may have had a third.
That's good looking with the motorbike.
Yeah.
Anything you can do.
Oh yeah.
We call it Hogan bigger. Like there's a lot more people have one ball to get that.
It helps you.
real problem. Consistency. I'm sure. So we got into the work session. We went planning director last Tuesday. She had oh yeah, not lately. Yeah, but she who's gonna get this picture here? So they brought forth this project in contract with a train system like a lot of but anyways, you were appointed to this committee so when she said that, I said, well, we would work something on your show. And I didn't say publicly that. That's like your testimony, but she's gone. Our affairs officer the planning director, she turned to her, HR. We went into a retreat.
Good thing today. You gotta do something.
You guys are probably
Well, I was hoping you should catch them. I don't know, sure. Actually, it's I was
It was just a matter of time before we got those We'll see if it actually happens.
And I think what's going on, right, exactly. Because we could, we'll find a spot for it. I always thought it I learned that.
Oh, wait, be careful. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, isn't Amtrak, doesn't matter what time they pull in the station, you're not gonna leave till the parker time. It's time for our next program. We're gonna do it. Amtrak. But, you know, they're not always on schedule, right? Sometimes they get delayed. All right. Our next presenter, we have seen before, and, after these programs, I get emails from people, it's like, you gotta have those guys back. So, that was a very strong suggestion that, I bring this guy back. And thankfully, he's, willing to do that. So we have, Randy Hees from, Little Rock now, and he has a extensive history with rail preservation and some pretty big operations. He's going to talk about the Cotton Belt business cars for us today.
So I have sitting in front of me some written material. So a lot of what I'll talk about is also in writing. I will say this is still a work in progress. It's based upon the records held by the museum in Pine Bluff. Those records we're still going through. We're finding things that go back to 1888, as the railroad is first standard gauge. And our last record is, they were keeping paper records until about 1980. In 1958, they started using the computer, but the old guys who were maintaining the records every so often had to print out what the computer said. So we have bound books of what the computer thinks on different days. So today I'm going to talk about official cars. And official cars are the business cars of the railroad, or whatever they're being used for. But they also include instruction cars, and they include others. We'll see a little bit on the others. The others are kind of fun. I have a table back there with a lot of the material I was using to write this. The museum allowed me to take it and bring it. There's even one piece from the Title Museum that they loaned me to help with this project. So with that, the best written source, Southern Pacific Historical Technical Society, has a series of books on passenger cars. It's 6 volumes. The last volume is on their business and official cars. Being that Cotton Belt was owned by the Southern Pacific in 1930 on, they include them. The problem is they do it from a California perspective, and anything that didn't make it to California or was gone by 1930 is left out, and there's some details because the Cotton Belt do not keep clean records. A copy of the book is back there for you to look at. Oh, okay, they want me to. Yeah, okay, so the book. Okay, so the earliest official record we found, this is the page out of the Historical Register of Equipment. This was a book that was actually 3 volumes of books plus one for steam locomotives that was created starting about 1888 when the railroad was coming out of its 3rd receivership. J. Gould was buying into the line at the time. This is the business cars. We'll see more of this. Okay, this is the earliest published record, public record. And this is the official Railway Equipment Register, a document that started publication in 1887. And railroads would publish information about their railroad cars. And this really important information. You know, railroad cars were starting to be interchanged. But if a depot agent had somebody call up and say, I need a 30-foot boxcar with 20-ton capacity, the agent can look at what he has around and say, well, I've got this one, number 52 something, and this is its dimensions, and this is its capacity. Well, early on, they listed their passenger equipment. And the passenger equipment is over there. It includes both the narrow gauge cars, parentheses, small, and the standard gauge cars. So the narrow gauge coaches are the even numbers down up to 40. The Mail Express are odd numbers. And then you've got the new equipment. And I was drawn to this document by a gentleman who was trying to do the history of the White Pass in Yukon in Alaska, and thought that 2 Brill passenger cars had come from the Cotton Belt, based upon this. And by the way, I use the term Cotton Belt because otherwise you have to be the Tyler Tap or the Texas and St. Louis, or the Arkansas, Texas and St. Louis, or the St. Louis Southwestern, or St. Louis Southwestern of Texas, or the Dallas Terminal, or a number of bridge companies. So I'm going to use that term, and please accept that. He noticed that 2 cars, number 22 and 24, were missing, and those cars matched the description of the Brill cars that were in Alaska. The problem is he didn't look over on the official cars and had no idea that Arkansas was in fact car 24 and Texas was car 22. So they're here, and we trace them kind of through that. At this point, we also have one other business car that we'll see a little later. Okay, so a Brill ad, it's showing one of their standard coaches. We think of them as a streetcar builder. They were building a lot of narrow gauge equipment in the 1870s, and apparently their salesman was very active along the Mississippi River. But that was what one of these cars would have looked like as a coach. The 2 cars in question were considered parlor cars. The others were considered second class. Usually it just was how the seats were set up. I'm going to treat these three absolutely as separate cars because they kind of come as a group and they have a group confusion. So the first one was Business Car Arkansas. It would later become Business Car 05. And by the way, 05 is not 5, it's a different number. They reuse numbers, they reuse names. They reuse the name Dixie 3 times. It is interesting trying to run through their list. And I'm presenting the cars in roughly the order the railroad started. It was built from Grill Parlor 24, even though it was Arkansas in the Railway Equipment Register in 1888. In 1900, it was number 24 again. So this is some of the confusion that we have. Records say it may have been Combine 143. Maybe it may have been done. If so, it was rebuilt in 1915 back to a business car. It was used as the pay car, important role on a railroad when you pay in cash. Dismantled in 1933 as Business Car 05. We have its drawing. It's just an interesting car. The problem with these three cars, I'm going to give you the disposition I think is true, but I have 5 dispositions for 3 cars. So it does become complicated. Okay, second one, and by the way, the Arkansas was converted as a narrow gauge car to a narrow gauge business car. Probably is the pay car, where the others were converted from narrow gauge passenger cars to standard gauge business cars. Texas number 04, it's the first Texas. You notice these are 39 feet roughly over their end sills. Railroads measure, particularly wooden cars, but most steel cars, over the end of the body, not including end platforms or vestibules. Okay, so when I say a 39-foot car, it's going to be closer to 40, another 42 feet when it's in a train. Okay, so Texas, same dimensions as Arkansas, Grill Parlor 22. Records say it may have been built into baggage car 120, but it also says it was sold to a Mexican railroad in 1898 before it was converted. So this is some of the confusion we have. Been going through all of the passenger car records to look for alternate candidates. We have a minor problem. The Tyler Pack Railroad had a passenger car, maybe 2. The White River in Arkansas and Missouri had 2 passenger cars. We don't have dispositions. If I count no grill cars, we suddenly find another grill coach on the Kansas and Gulf Short Line. But I don't have a missing grill coach from the Cotton Belt for it to be that car. So confusion around the cars and where they went in that early period. Finally, we have St. Louis, which becomes 03, about the same size, maybe half an inch shorter. It's rebuilt from an unknown narrow gauge car. It doesn't have as many confusions in what happened to it. It becomes 03. It's also listed in the earliest records as being the consort car. And in business car lingo, frequently with narrow gauge cars and occasionally with standard gauge cars, you run 2 cars together. Sometimes the second car is a baggage car. That's what the Central Pacific did at Promontory in May of 1869. It was full of supplies and ice, so they could ice down the alcohol so they could miss this golden spike when they tried to hit it. An important concept, Colorado would run 3 narrow gauge passenger cars together, so one of them's holding the crew. So if in fact St. Louis was the consort car, it was probably the consort car of Arkansas. Okay, so we're back to the historical record of equipment. This is a very large volume. This is about 25 by 12. It's very fragile, that's why it's not here. If you look to the right-hand edge, you'll notice how torn up it is. Unfortunately, there's 2 columns of equipment listed here. Unfortunately, the disposition is in the missing right-hand edge. We run into. In later pages, the left-hand edge is missing, And so you don't even actually, you know the car number only by counting lines and saying this has to be car 12. On this thing, on the left-hand side, we see Arkansas, we see actually St. Louis, Arkansas, Texas are the first three cars. We see Gladys, who will be the first car purpose-built. We get confused. Because then if you look in the right-hand side, we have 03, 04, and 05, which are carryovers from the first column, which is not how they do this record. And dispositions missing, we do have what we can start to see here. And you can see that under Texas, it's baggage car 120 in 1906. But the problem is on the other side as car 04, it's written down, the second to the last line is sold to the C&Z Railway, and a date of 1898. So I'm presuming it was sold to Mexico and some other piece of junk was rebuilt into a baggage car. We'll continue to look into that problem to figure out what is going on. But this is consistent with these first three cars. I find, for example, this car, Texas, in 3 different lines with different information. So I can find it as its original car 22, I can find it as the Texas, and I can find it as the 04. And that is kind of one of my problems in doing these service cars. Okay, so here's what these cars start to look like. 05 had been the Arkansas. It probably has been turned into a combine. It's now been turned back into a business car. It's going to last until 1933 on the railroad. There is a notation on one piece of paper, it's a superintendent's car. So it's not for the railroad president, it's for the superintendent. May have been used in Louisiana. And there we have. So many of the drawings, and I have all of the car drawings back there on the table, have a historical record. Not all of them, just to make it more fun. So it says, built by St. Louis Southwestern in November 1899. But we know it to be the Arkansas, which is separately said to have been built in 1885. It's special car 04, except we think it was probably 05. Changed to baggage car 120 in March 1906, rebuilt as a business car in January. So at least that gives me a path. Except I think she's really 143, not 120. They mixed the record of 2 cars. And this is over, you can see the red arrow down where we find this information. Okay, here's other information. The blueprint copies come from a 1915, actually July 1st, 1915 journal that was created to take that previous equipment records and put everything in one neat package for the new Interstate Commerce Commission valuation survey. So it's telling us what coach and baggage car 143 has, and then down below describing it. And this cost is as a business car, but as saying was converted to pay car and later to coach and baggage, estimated cost of, and then the following year they're going to build it back into a business. So this is the kind of process we go through. Being a wooden car guy repeatedly, I find it very interesting. The car was built, this is in the upper box, with a tin roof, but it was replaced by a canvas roof. And that's really unusual because a good turned metal roof will last 100 years. And here we're seeing it replaced early, and we're seeing it replaced by a cheap canvas roof. The cotton belt used canvas roofs on a lot of them. Okay, here is special car 04. And they have very carefully blanked out whatever it was before. It's one of the 3. I held this thing up to the light to see if I can see what's in there under the black. And there's nothing there. The drawing number seems to date to the period after the turn of the century. We don't have a complete drawing index, but we have a lot of drawing index, and I've looked at similar drawings, trying to figure out what it was. But it's clearly another one of these 39-foot passenger cars, former narrow gauge, that's been turned into a business car. And 03, the one that we have the cleanest history, this was St. Louis. This is the one that the records don't tell us what it was rebuilt. So one of the things, the real passenger cars after the railroad was standard gauge, most of them seem to have been put into depot service. It's very possible that they're parked someplace to be the depot temporarily, and when the real depot is built, they're then returned to the car shop, and that's a supposition. There's no facts to support it. There's facts to support their depot cars. There's no facts to support it, but it seems to be a grill. The other cars that were available by Pullman or Ohio Falls have different dimensions. Okay, now we get into something that's a little easier to do, but this is an example of what you trace. So this is Gladys, built in 1887. It was going to be Fordyce's car. Fordyce is the receiver of the railroad after the bankruptcy, after the receivership, after the railroad standard gauge. Built by St. Charles. There are records that say it's a Pullman. It's not a Pullman, it's a St. Charles. 1887. Later named Arkansas Traveler. Then it's Gladys again. Then it's Isabel. Then it's Traveler. It's the first time we see the name Traveler. Then it becomes Ranger. That's the first time and it's Ranger 06, but still Ranger. That's the first time we see the name Ranger. Then it's Texas. And the car's retired in 1932. This photo, it's at St. Louis Car Company, probably being rebuilt. As best I can tell, the name Arkansas Traveler may have been when Fordyce left the railroad. That you can kind of trace what's going on. But this was a really high-end business car. It got electricity, it got all the fancy things you get. It got rebuilt by St. Charles, not by Pine Bluff or Tyler. We don't need to go back to 03. I know, I'm going the wrong way. There. Boy. Here is her car as Texas. So this is called the clearance guide. So half of what it's there for is to make sure it will fit past whatever is there. It's also the record for shops, kind of what the car is. These records are redrawn every time a minor change is made to the car. So this is its last clearance card. She'll be broken up in 1932. As far as I can tell, in 1932 still had a gun. Okay, now we get to Special Car 11. Look the gentleman's name out. Okay. Anyway, when they named a co-receiver in 1889 for the railroad to work with Fordyce, probably some of the bondholders didn't trust Fordyce because he went to the pre-narrow gauge era. They hired a gentleman from the Houston, Texas Central. On the Houston, Texas Central, he was assigned Special Car 11, or maybe only Car 11. And when it got to the Cotton Belt, it became Special Car 11. It's going to be downgraded to become 04, so it's now in that superintendent's car group. It's also a shorter car. It was secondhand when they bought it. So it will be broken up again in the 30s. Retired in 1937, a little longer, but it's going to be that superintendent's car that is going to be used when you're supervising changes on the railroad when you're not the president. We now get to the first Dixie of 3, which will later be Ranger. We've seen these names, seen Ranger before. I think this was purchased for Raymond Group. So this was, when it was bought in 01, this was a good, serious business car. It will get a steel underframe. It will last until 1937. It shows up in the SP records because it's an SP car. Well, it really isn't, but it is. We do have a historical record on it. Not quite as big as the Lander cars, but getting close now. We're getting into what we think of as a full-size steel passenger car, and it was steel clad. So it's a composite construction. Immediately, 1905, they had another one. This one by A&M. St. Charles has become ACNF at this point. Traveler was second because Gladys had been Traveler for a little while for some reason. This car will go to the USRA as a business car during the period a little over a year that the federal government nationalized the US railroads. It comes back and is renamed Traveler. It gets a steel under it. It gets air conditioned. You can kind of tell that when a car gets air conditioned, you come into the modern era. Cotton Belt was not a railroad that embraced air conditioning. They didn't generally air condition equipment until the arrival of the Osgood passenger cars. And about that time, they started air conditioning their business cars. They had acquired one of the dining cars from SP. Actually, the cars they got from the Delaware and Hudson during World War II had been used for use in New York, had been air conditioned before they got to the Cotton Belt. But Cotton Belt believed in open windows, I think. In fact, some of these reports will tell us there's screens on the windows. So Traveler still survives. She's listed on the National Register. She is a lake house just south of Pine Bluff. She kind of has been offered to the Arkansas Railroad Museum, but conditions of moving her have been challenging. There's even a grant of $100,000 to move it. There's stories about a number of business cars that may have gone away because they're so difficult to move. You don't just call up UP and say, can you bring it in? Of course, it's on light trains. Okay, Dixie, we've heard that name before. And she also has a number 1. This is the first time this was the first car to be numbered and named, and we've got this new system of numbers and names. We've been through another system of 0 and a number of 1908, ACF, but from my own notes, I didn't put it here. I think she's purchased used from the Union Railroad's St. Louis. She's going to last through World War II. She will be air conditioned. But what we do see, no, she was purchased new. What we do see in 1944, an AFE, this came out of the Tyler stuff, removal and sale of a portion of dining equipment from the office of Dixie, now used as extra car. So we can see probably need at this point 4 or 5 business cars. They no longer use superintendent's cars. She's become the spare car. And in 1948, 4 years later, that she will be retired. There was a note in historian Jim Bennett's note. She may be in Texas, but the records say she was sold to a scrapper in Chicago. You can get away from scrappers sometimes. This is number 7, and I'm going to say that she's a superintendent's car, probably. This is the one bought from the this one's bought from the Jonestown and Eastern Railroad, and cleaned up, and she's gonna last until 1953. But you can look at her, it's an older design, that deep letterboard is covering transom windows. This would have been a pretty car at one time. Here we have her car card. Don't have a lot on her there, but again, probably a superintendent's car. Arcolone, bought as number 8. She's bought from Chicago Terminal, or the Terminal Railroad of St. Louis. Purchased in 1912. Initially, she is number 8, so they're in that numbering period of 12, where everything has a 0 and an 8. One quirk of business cars, according to the ICC, are work cars. They're not passenger cars. So they're in the work car books for AFEs and for car register but they're listed on the passenger car list on the Cotton Belt's internal system. Okay, she makes it to 1945 on that, when we lose the second or third Dixie. Okay, so here we have the 1916 valuation survey. So this is driven by 1915 journal number 8. And this is interesting. Up at the top is work equipment, and included, and this is why I'm including some of the other cars, agricultural demonstration cars. We've got 3 of the earliest standard gauge coaches that are agricultural demonstration cars. We've got an instruction car, a car that will go to different yards in the railroad. You can take your annual rules test. It's something that will continues to some extent to today. And then we have the business cars. And we can see on this one, they are in that O number series until you get to Ranger, Traveler, and Dixie. But we're just a different class. They're the fancier cars. Next anchor point. This is drawing 1203. I have 3 versions of this drawing over on the table. This is the earliest known one. This was the document Cotton Belt used on a day-to-day basis to track their passenger cars. First created, you can notice there's a lot of missing edges around this one. Included in the missing information is the date. The earliest date I can find is 1921. This is a blueprint copy from a Belt, so in their record keeping or folio sheets, they're going to put them on vellum and blueprint copies for distribution to multiple people. And then this drawing will be revised. So the original drawing is 1203. The first revision is A, so it's 1203A. We have them through Q here today. And this one is through F, and then I have one which is only H, and then I have 8 up to Q. Okay, so this is on that drawing the line for passenger cars. So when it was created, we had Dixie, Traveler, Ranger, Texas, 07, 05, 04, and 03. And you can see that at this point they've gotten rid of 05, 04, 03, and Texas. They've been retired. Scrapped is what they put over on the edge. In this case, they didn't number it. Frequently, they date it. You can see above it some notes for other passenger cars. So this is a really interesting document, that it gives us, out of its last update, gives us what the equipment was. Its last update was, I think, 38. Okay, now we start getting into interesting things. It's 1942, and the railroad buys from Henry Ford his personal private car. It's Fairlane, named after his estate in Michigan. There's a car named Model Ford named after this thing. And this car is going to be, I'm going to say this car is probably the railroad's baby. It's kind of more important than the other. They truly love this car. They keep mentioning Henry Ford when they in the records. The little blue box is actually a Pullman plan data box, which, because they found the Pullman plan in the car and stapled to it, "Do not destroy," found in Fairlane. It's over there to be looked at. When you look at Fairlane here, it's pretty much as she arrived. Okay, and she was air conditioned when she arrived, but based upon her equipment car, they spent a lot of time on air conditioning for this car. And ultimately, we'll install safety glass windows and aluminum sash. So we have another thing. Oh, this is the whole drawing of the Pullman drawing. We have 2 file boxes of correspondence relating to Fairlane. So in this case, they're going to tell them, they're telling Pine Bluff that Fairlane's coming into the shop and we want some upholstery work done. And the shop has in the correspondence 3 or 4 examples, but they say you can only get rear push. And this is the level of detail, so that when this car comes in, the Lord High Boss is going to tell you what he wants and how this car should be cared for. By the way, Fairlane survives. She was retired, was given to the Cherokee Indians, and they sold her to the Benson Ford Museum, so she's in Dearborn. This is another weirdness of Fairlane. Okay, so it's actually a weirdness of Cotton Belt business cars. How were they painted? So Cotton Belt had an independent streak. The earliest Arkansas probably was cherry red. And we know that because we see how the Jackson and Sharp cars were working. By the turn of the century, we're going to probably see the equipment go to a dark olive green based upon what Pullman was using. They're going to continue with that until they paint the roofs of their dark olive green cars silver to try to keep them clear. Not a bad car, okay, but it's not SP standard. SP is very rigid. They have their common standards that are published and paint numbers are issued, and Cotton Belt's going to do their own thing a little bit, and they get away with it. The Cotton Belt business cars on the Southern Pacific were the only business cars painted daylight. And they were all painted daylight after 1953. Anybody that was still around. 1958, a letter comes from Mr. Russell, president of the railroad, that the new paint scheme, he had looked around one day and had noticed that the Southern Pacific had 2-tone gray cars for the Lark and for Overland, and they had yellow cars to work with the UP, and they had daylight cars to work with the trains up and down the coast, and they had silver cars with red letterboards that were the Sunset Limited, and they had a special scheme for use with the wrought iron. He was looking around and he decided there were 7 paint schemes, and that was probably 6 too many. And he made a determination that the silver with the red letterboard would, some different striping would become the standard. And here we have Fairlane. And if you look below the windows, that's not silver, that's Dove gray. And that red box behind the name, that's not SP practice. They're gonna follow Mr. Russell's instructions, but not to the letter. And we actually, here's another picture of Fairlane. This one was important, I found it on the internet, but it's at Commerce, Texas, so I thought it was a good piece to have. Here she is again. It's harder to see that, but over on the other side, we have the painting instructions for Fairlane. And very clearly shows below the butt rail that it's color number 3, and color number 3 is smoke gray. So we're going to enforce our independence. Back when they did daylight, they enforced their independence by having a silver roof and yellow crabs, which neither were SP practice. Okay, now we get to what will be nearly our last business card. I can track 13 business cards on the railroad at this point. 1953, they no longer are going to be providing or reduced dining room service. And they take a steel, underframe steel body car that they had acquired as a parlor car from Pullman, and rebuilt into a parlor diner, into a full diner during World War II when they just needed to have extra cars, and have now built it into a business park. It's Dixie. And again, this one probably wasn't quite the pet that Fairlane was, but she clearly was important to them. Here we have the dining cars, folio sheet. Here we have Dixie. She is down in Texas. She, I believe, has been donated to the Austin Steam Train Association. I don't know if she's been moved. Initially, she was given to Tyler, Texas Depot Museum, and they could never get her moved because these are monsters. We're looking at a cost of around $1 million. Now we get to the last business. They have sold off Dixie, they've sold off Fairland, or retired them. They are assigned a business card by SP. And this was originally an El Paso and Southwestern coach. They acquired in El Paso, that was part of Phelps Dodge, copper mining out of El Paso. You follow the Rock Island, this railroad built down from El Paso at the Tucumcari, and the SP, the Rock Island trains that were going to the West Coast, went to Tucumcari, were handed off to the now SP on El Paso and Southwestern, and then down to the SP line of El Paso and went to LA. So we see some of this equipment, but they've taken this coach and this is SP in probably Oakland, but maybe Sacramento, rebuilt it to a new business park, which is number 104 in San Jose. Well, they sell her to the Cotton Belt in 1987, and she becomes renumbered SSW 151, but she retains the name San Jose. Okay? Then, 3 years later, they rename her Pine Bluff. Then SP decides Cotton Belt doesn't really need its own business car. We have a business car fleet. And as they did until they were taken over by UP, so she becomes SP 151 Pine Bluff. Okay? And remains on the railroad until 1987 when she was auctioned. And is actually still in private preservation and maybe Amtrak legal. So she might appear somewhere at some point. But this name change, Cotton Belt's going to try to enforce just a little bit of personality into their railroad by renaming her. We don't need a car named San Jose. We want a car named Pine Bluff. But this car was not maintained in Pine Bluff. If this car needed service, she's now sent to West Oakland, where the entire business car fleet can be maintained, and that can be reviewed by the SP executives at one mark. There's a picture of the coach before she's rebuilt. There's a picture of her as 104 San Jose, and she's in two-tone gray. So we have another paint. This is a color never used on the Cotton Belt. This two-tone gray. She didn't have black and two-tone gray. She arrived in silver. But it is kind of fun. Nowadays, nobody else would wear it. Here she is a silver and red car named San Jose. But this would be just before she was brought to the Cotton Belt. Okay. Other official cars. And this is an area where I'm using known on this. So in our 1915 paperwork, we see an instruction car 183, which is former coach built by St. Charles in 1890. 52-foot wood body and frame four-wheel trucks. By 1915, a 52-foot car is only fit for ranch line service in the afternoon. So they converted this car to that service. She will be replaced in 1940 by an instruction car. It's wood steel composite St. Louis or ACF, built as a parlor cafe. They're not providing that service anymore. Converted to instruction car. Retired as instruction car and renumbered, given a work number, so she's being used as a boarding car. She's replaced by 99301, 1953. Very likely as a composite car with an underframe. They decided they weren't going to have that car in service anymore with employees. And this car will be, pictures of it in 1970, still is an instruction car. Don't have a date because it will be in a computer file we don't have access to. And I will actually mention that we have in the collection in Pine Bluff a Baking the Goose converted to an instruction car. Very late. It's actually air conditioned. Tables, you can go in there and you can take your annual rules test. But that probably is the end of the construction, the instruction cars. Okay, other official cars. This group is one. Okay, there is a picture in Jacob's book of a American Car and Foundry 1910 coach, which says farm products of East Texas, Northwest NW, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri on the side and about 1 foot tall letters. There was a tradition of cars being taken out and parked in a city and presenting to the locals some training, maybe about growing things, maybe about other things that we might see. But it was predated by 3 other cars, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Jackson Sharp 1886, first standard gauge cars to arrive on the railroad, standard gauge. Here's 3 of those small cars, like that other instruction car, that are being used as agricultural demonstration cars. And we see it in the ICC records. I can find it I found them in the retired work equipment list. And then finally, one that I found that Ed knew about this car. ANOPHELES. It is a mosquito that carries malaria. I can find reference to a 2-car train touring the South in general, trying to teach people how to eradicate mosquitoes. Whether this was one of the cars from that 2-car train, if so, it's a Pennsylvania car converted for the service. In any event, from 1920 to 1929, the Cotton Belt considered it. In your handout, I've kind of given you a roster of the cars as best I can. I've got an index at the back so you can try to keep track of the names and go back and forth through all the names. I needed it to try to keep them straight. And I've got some sources, and I'm happy to answer questions, or at lunch, you can go back or break. I'll be there at the table and we can look at the documents. Thank you very much.
Brady,
Yes.
can I ask you a question, or I got a couple comments?
I'm
St.
good at
Charles,
making stuff up.
St. Charles, is that in Missouri?
What?
St. Charles?
Oh, yeah, it's actually in the St. Louis area. It's on the north side. It's where Lewis and Clark left on their little
I've
walkabout.
got a kid from St. Charles, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, the St. Charles Car Company, and it was merged into American Car and Foundry, along with Jackson, Sharp, I think Ohio Falls. I mean, just all of it was the big monopolization of railroad car building. And those that didn't get merged in were either Pullman or went out of business.
Another couple of comments, the Cherry Kirkland photos, they were taken in October 1972.
Okay.
Officials came in on train 343. Cherry Kirkland was the operator that day. I was a rail fan resident. I was asked by Terry, make yourself scarce because there's officials coming in on this train. Terry got the photos. I saw it from way down the street. I think it was like the city market area, going back to the university. Here comes this passenger car into town. So that's the story on those. No more. That was Fairlane.
Yeah.
Terry got the photos on that. The Anaphiles, I have photos of that. I have a photo of the instruction car, Kingdom of Commerce, either late 72 or early 73, so it's still around then. It became a exhibit for a restaurant someplace in Little Rock or Memphis.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was around for a while. So Mount Sheridan, if you go to Mount Sheridan, I don't know what happened.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
When you were talking about the first tractor,
Yes.
you said you think it was built for, and I didn't understand.
Oh, Edward Booth.
Edwin Booth.
Yeah, it lines up with Fordyce retiring short period. They ordered this car. Gould had, they very interesting relationship between the Goulds. Generally took no prisoners. For some reason, when they acquired Cotton Belt, they kept Fordyce, and it just represents one of those questions about the relationship of the railroad. There's a period in Missouri where, when they're still using the car float, when they extended to St. Louis, it was first to Bird's Point, and a car float across the river K Road, and then using other tracks. Well, for a period of time, the passenger cars went up the then Iron Mountain tracks to St. Louis, and then some freight went up that route. So it's trying to understand that relationship. And one of my comments as a historian, we're finding there's a thing called historiography, a study of the study of history. Texas likes its heroes, and Major Douglas was a hero that erased. They became so involved with that some of the history that was written in '39 doesn't include some of the. He built another railroad, the Kansas and Gulf Short Line, and sold it to the Commonwealth. You know, he built the streetcar system in Kyler. We miss some of that, plus because Texas builds a wall around Texas, they ignore some of the history. And then when we get into Arkansas rail fans, if they're a Cotton Belt guy, do not talk about the Buckeyes or the Missouri Pacific. And Missouri Pacific never talks about anything south of their border. So trying to get a complete history, one of the really good books about Cotton Belt, about labor operations, the Blue Street book, is written from an SP's perspective. So here you've got the first railroad to build really dedicated high-speed freight service. And what we hear about is SP using the concept to move auto parts. So there's a lot to be learned as you explore this stuff. So, yes?
A few comments. The two white pass cars you mentioned, I would go to Chad's, those are all the ones.
One of them I think is still there.
They're no longer used.
Right, Colin and I are being good at all the excursions for Carnival Corporation, essentially bought into the White Pass so they can control the cruise ship experience. And they bought new locomotives and they bought new passenger cars. I don't think, I would be suspicious that they're not used. One of them may have been mostly scrapped in fire, an accidental fire. I think the one still around is
The other comment is, I was addicted to newspaper.com.
yes.
I saw a mention just the other day in one of the, either late 1800s or early 1900s, so-and-so came into Fort Worth on the traveler. And they'll actually mention the name of the, sometimes they'll mention the name of the business card.
It's rare. There was a privacy issue, much like Elon Musk removed all the airplane tracing from the service formerly called Twitter. They did not want their names mentioned. So I've been doing the Pacific business card, which is at the last railroad museum in Boulder City, which started out as a private car of the president of Wagner Palace Park, Dr. Seward Webb, and was named, anyway, never find the name. I know where it is on certain days. Does the newspaper mention the name? The only place I see them reliably mention names is Palm Beach, where there's three private car tracks, or Monterey, California, at the Delmani Hotel. Otherwise, mostly they do not mention car names. They might say he came into town, but or they'll say the private car from came into town and these were the people in it.
On the cars that they air conditioned, were any of them block ice?
Yes.
Okay.
It's called ice activated.
Ice activated, okay.
Yeah. In fact, I think Dixie was. And we do see them in the AFEs. There are like 8 lines for air conditioning on Fairway. Apparently they didn't like the air conditioning that it came down from Michigan. Reworked it and reworked it and reworked it. We see the business cars being reworked in part because the last Dixie that had air conditioning as a diner was set up to be a train. Well, now she is operating primarily independent. So you have a generator and batteries. Whether it's axle, they usually use some kind of small diesel generator, like you find in a refrigerator.
One last question. In your records, do you have anything about either pay cars or commissary cars?
Not commissary, pay car, so the Arkansas was initially pay car.
Okay.
And pay cars generally go out of service on US railroads, sometime 1913 to 1918. You know, that's the period that we go to bank checks. It may be slightly different in rural South, but, so the pay card became less important. It was a better way to pay.
And that is a chore to keep up with all those transitions and names and cars sharing the same names. I'm gonna break this one minute here to get the next slide you want, and,
It's interesting. This year, let's say it's gonna have to be revised. As I go through this.
Somewhere.
Really?
Yeah. Might get to the looking at the side, we are really
This is another one that back by popular request, so, just looking forward to your presentation.
Okay.
Right, I'll use I believe this, bad joke on business program.
I will look it up.
It was the best of timetables, it was the worst of timetables. Exactly, that's what I'm blaming on him. I think I just said it, I'm blaming on him, that's what it is. So thank you very much. Only probably one person in this room will have heard of second, town. These actually aren't cities in Texas, these are probably communities, but I mean, it just doesn't go as well, we say, KO2 towns or communities, so, it's an attempt to look at the effects of the railroad, maybe the lack of the railroad on communities, because, this is really a lot of railroads are in business, they have communities. Texas got so tired of moving courthouses that the 16th legislature even said not passed a law saying the railroad had to go within a mile of the county courthouse, or miss it by like 5 or 6 miles, because they were tired of all this junk around. So it was expensive, the state had to pay for it. So, the railroads made a big difference, and, to miss your city by a few miles, well, back in the day, they would just put the buildings on skiffs and drag them to the town side before we could operate the wooden buildings, certain operations. So, there was a big, for really from the 60s, 70s through the 1920s and 30s, there was a big incentive to get the railroads to come to your community. So 2 towns I'm going to look at today, one of them It's called Providence City, and so it has word city in its name, you know, and this is from the Handbook of Texas. It was a land promotional endeavor. It's a nice way to read. Located between Goldenrod and Sandy Creeks near the southern tip of Colorado County. I'll show you that in a minute. Founded in 1909 on lands that was about 35,000 acres owned by the Provident Land Company of Kansas City, and served as a business and shopping center for about 500 families from the Midwest who bought 5 to 10 acre tracts, sight unseen, and moved to the area. So this was not the only land promotional scheme in Texas or any of the states, you know, but they were appealing to, in this particular case, appealing to Midwesterners who may have some mercantile business or something else, to be a gentleman farmer. You know, that was kind of the appeal of Benjamin Franklin. He was a gentleman farmer, right? You know, so you could make a good living, you could be a philanthropist, you know, you could harvest your crops, you could learn a lot, you could share that with people, and you felt like you contributed. And there was still a desire in the early 1900s for the gentleman farmer. It would disappear pretty much by World War I. So they were at the tail end of really getting people to appeal to do this kind of thing. So the company, they built a large hotel in Ganado and another one in Providence City to house the settlers. And of course, there was no roads or anything to this at the time, so it was pretty primitive to get them to come, you know, to actually get to Providence City. But for a time, it actually flourished. They had banks, churches, restaurants, a school, several general merchandise, grocery stores, a drugstore, undertaker, and a jewelry store, as well as a cannery for local produce, and eventually a brew factory. Not all of them there at the same time, but it actually did quite well for literally being out almost in the middle of nowhere. So today, there's Colorado County in red, and there's a little dog leg, which was probably a surveyor's error, and Providence City is a little red dot right there. It actually straddled Colorado County, which is in red, and Lavaca County, which is to the west of it. And so about half of it was in Colorado County, about half of it was in Lavaca County. And I'll show you a picture today. There's really nothing out there but the prairie, but it kind of started out that way. All right, so this is a map from 1909. This is one of their promotional land company maps, and it kind of tell you where Providence City is, and they show you a couple things. There's a couple of dashed lines. One of them is this Santa Fe survey route. Apparently, the Santa Fe survey route from Glen, Florida, which was on their branch between Sealy and Matagorda, to Cuero. And of course, Cuero was all excited about getting another railroad. We couldn't have too many back in the day. The other dash line is one that's going from around El Campo in some kinds of places they call this Pierce, Texas, which is not all that far away, Providence City. And so this is how Providence City is going to get its railroad, you know, from either building this themselves or using the prior survey from the Santa Fe. They didn't really say in this brochure how this can happen until this is 1909, so it's really when they're first kind of starting up. But this is their promise to people that, you know, once we get the railroad, hey, things are really going to happen. Because right now, you pretty much have to drag everything there by mule team or oxen team, you know, and such. Because there's not a lot of good roads. Ganado really had the most direct route to Providence City because this was all remembered, all prairie until this time. Here's an actual Providence City Land Company map. That was in the Nesbitt Library in Columbus, Texas. You notice at the very bottom there, in the right-hand corner, that's the railroad coming in. Of course, there's going to be a railroad station and some decks and whatever. This is how the railroad's actually going to reach Providence City, and it's nowhere near kind of the center of activity, which is really up in kind of the left top there, you know, where they have this park and this acreage. It basically has the Providence City Land Company actually bought a bunch of acreage for orange and fig orchards. They were going to basically be this produce center, right? You know, they're going to have all this stuff. That's why they're going to have the cannery, so they can can all this stuff, and they're going to ship it by rail. And that's where you're going to make your money, right? You know, because getting your product to market was half of it. You know, raising the first half, you can't get to market, it's just going to rot because you've got no other way to preserve it as you can. So this was kind of their big scheme. It's like, hey, come down to Providence City, you know, you people up in Kansas, you know, quit freezing your beef straw. I'll come down here where it's nice all year long, right? You know, perfect growing weather, and raise all this stuff, and you can live comfortably. That was always their line. So they formed what's called a right-of-way company. This is for the railroad in 1909. $5,000 was the capital stock. Terry Shaw was an area businessman. He owned a private bank in Columbus, along with a guy named French Simpson. E.W. Count is an attorney. And Louis A. Sherlock, which is a name that'll come up over and over again. He was actually the president of the Provident Land Company in Kansas City. So he's on this board as well. Halsville Herald Railroad stated that active surveying was underway in Lower Lalaca County in late August. The Houston Post says that, quote, the citizens of Hallettsville and the lower part of Lalaca County will donate liberally to secure the railroad, which is connected to the San Antonio Rangers path, which already went through Hallettsville. So, again, Hallettsville's excited because they have a crossroads there, and they have a railroad to supplement. By September 24th, they're saying, hey, the surveyors are reportedly at the F-Out Ranch near Ganado. As Ganado, everybody wanted to be on the railroad, so they're kind of battling. Ganado wants to be on the railroad, Pierce wants to be on the railroad, Campo, which is all kind of in a line along 59, want to be on the railroad. So they're all kind of battling, saying, choose me, choose me. And December of 1909, the Hallettsville Herald stated the public roads from Ganado to Providence City were in such poor shape from all the traffic carrying materials that the latter point at the land company was constructing, quote, an automobile road. Never mind the fact that we're really any automobiles. They call this an automobile road. And what it's used for is what you see here. That's actually an oxen team in Providence City hauling building materials. And so people are hauling stuff pretty much to Ganado. That's the railroad point to New York, Texas, Mexican. Offload Ganado and then use this road all to Providence City and that's your materials. A very slow and expensive way to build a town. But this is what you were faced with without any kind of other transportation. So finally, on December 13th, 1909, they formed the Gulf Coast of Providence City, the GCDPC, as $50,000 capital. Here's the officers: Emil Reinhold of Kansas City, Louis Sturlock, who's also the president of the Providence City Land Company, T.J. Coughlin, Kerry Shaw of Houston, James Reese of Houston and Kansas City, and then they're, of course, quoting here, much Houston capital is interested, and construction will begin within 30 days. Now, remember that line, construction will begin within 30 days. This is December 13th, 1909. 30 days. And all the newspapers are buzzing. So there's one from the Cuero Star. If a little timely vigilance is all it would take to get their community on board, they want to, another railroad. So the articles of incorporation state the railroad would run from Pierce in Wharton County and to Providence City, Colorado County. And this is about 35 miles. Actually, it's more like 31, but that's what they pulled in the newspaper article. Headquarters would be in Houston, and the Houston Post reported in January had approved the charter. So they're making progress. So by this time, here's some nice photographs. Providence City had a bank. There's a nice big old bank vault in there. Of course, the Provident Land Company. Down here is the Coleman-Newman store, later only the Coleman. And that's the wonderful, on the lower right-hand side, the wonderful Providence City Hotel. And that's it's a nice place to stay when you came, to look at your land prospects. Or if you'd already purchased your land and were coming down to see what you bought, which a lot of people did. A lot of people did that, some people probably never came down and actually saw that. This is where you could stay, for a fee. I'm not sure whether or not Bonnie and Clyde stayed here. Every hotel there was one of Bonnie and Clyde stayed there. I don't think I think they was closed by the time that Bonnie and Clyde came along. So homesteaders, there would be homesteaders that would come to Ganado because there was a hotel there also, and they would go overland, and this is where people would come and they would try to sell you the land that they hadn't already sold it to you before you got it. Mr. Polkberg of Hallettsville visited relatives and said, the area has grown up so fast, I hardly knew the place. People all seem busy breaking land, building houses, and preparing to make a spring crop. So they were busy and going on. Hallettsville New Era reported that the Ladies' Aid Society will give a social at the City Hotel on February 22nd, which is Washington's birthday. You'll have music, entertainments, ice cream, and cake. You'll be able to meet George Washington and his mother. And they're going to welcome visitors the night of February 22nd. And also, those of you that are kind of into what the future holds for you, Madame Lamartine will be there at the hotel to foretell your future for you. So, all to say, there are a lot of newspaper articles came up like this. So, Providence City really did have sort of a cultural side to it. There was a lot of investment in the community. They had a lot of picnics, a lot of barbecues. And so, they really were trying to build what they would kind of call a master plan community. What they're trying to do in Providence City. The problem is they were just doing it in a way that, was very, very profitable for the promoters, not so much for the people that walk around.
Would that have been talking about the first president, George Washington?
Yeah, Washington's birthday.
1910.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. The further south you get in Texas, the bigger Washington's birthday is. This is pretty far south, so it's a big deal. You get down to Brownsville, it's even bigger. So finally, the February edition of the Weekly Herald says that 15, 10, or even 5 years ago, no one would have thought of building a place such as Providence City. It's 25 miles from nowhere, on what has become long considered by natives as the poorest kind of land to be found in South Texas. No railroad nearer than 25 miles, but a town is being built there, and yet the land is being sold in small tracts at $40 an acre. It sold 5 years ago for $2.50. There are said to be 800 people living there on the tract. The official census found 553, but remember there were people coming all the time. The census was in April that year, so it's possible it could have been there. More coming every week. The land agent has been lavish in his advertising, but judicious in the wording of his ads, and is attracting a most desirable class of people to Providence City. It can't be said that this success is due to natural resources or advantages. If there is a town site anywhere that is devoid of natural resources, this looks like one. It's simply backed by men of brains and energy and pushed by all the vigor they can install into the movement. So this, by a newspaper that, stood to benefit somewhat from Providence City, but they're looking at how it is attracting a lot of people. Unfortunately, not doing it in the right way, but the people that came were serious about their endeavor. They really were trying to make a go of it. And that's the kind of people you want in your community. So they did actually publish the can. There's actually a lady can of Providence City tomatoes. There's the can on the left. Like most communities in the area, they have baseball teams. Providence City, I don't know what they were called. There's Providence City is all they were saying, but they had a winning record. I think their winning record was 68.4% in the 1910-1911 season. On the right is the Baptist Church. I think the Methodists used it as well. Down in the middle of the bottom is the school. I think there were 100 people enrolled by 1912, 100 students enrolled in 1912. And they're building the lumber yard in the lower right-hand corner. So things are happening despite the fact that there's no railroad. You've got people moving there, you've got stuff up and coming. Canning certainly was a good idea. Like I said, that was part of their scheme to raise stuff, can it, and ship it out on the rail cars. So that part of the dream actually kind of came to fruition. Finally, grading at Providence City. Notice the mule teams there. On October the 1st of 1910 at 8 a.m., a groundbreaking ceremony for the Gulf Coast and Providence City was held at Providence City. President McManus gave some remarks. A little after 10 a.m., Terry Shaw turned the first shovelful of dirt, followed by J. McManus, President, J.G. Reeves, Vice President, and General Manager. And finally, Miss Myrtle Sizer of Providence City. I guess she was like the mascot. The Chronicle stated that a large portion of the population of Providence City commenced work in the corner of the town site. A Mr. Roberts and Silas Taylor, both residents of Providence City, began with a plow while others followed with a scraper. Chief Engineer Schlafly took charge of the work and grading and will have a general charge of construction of the road. So notice, the residents of Providence City are actually doing grading initiative. The railroad hasn't been hired anybody. So they convinced people not only to come down here, but build your own railroad. Pretty ingenious, right? So, another quote later in that paper, later in the month, basically says that the company would actually provide teams to anybody that wanted to grade the railroad. So they'll actually give you the teams and plow. They'll give you the materials if you'll just go and do the work for them. Right? Although one guy said that the teams are rather runty for the #1 graders that are in use. The company offers to give work to all persons having teams and the supposition that the work will be rushed through. One thing is for certain, here's another quote you want to remember. If the railway is not actually finished, the Providence City swindle will have been the greatest ever perpetrated in this part of the state. According to the Houston Chronicle, about 5 miles have been graded, and that the funding for the railroad had been secured. So the first section of the railroad was to be built between Pierce and Providence City. Construction was planned to begin within 30 days. Have you heard that before? Okay, yeah, we heard that like in December. This is in March. Okay, so it's going to be within 30 days. In April, the Texas Road Commission provided an estimate of construction of $721,972 or $23,866 per mile. And they authorized the Gulf Coast and Providence City to issue $50,000 in stock and $672,000 in bonds to cover construction. For over a month, there was no other news about the railroad, but in May 20th, a remark from, quote, a friend said, "I wonder if we're going to get the railroad at Providence City. It is hoped for at least. We will welcome the sound of the whistle whenever we can hear it puffing along." Another one talked about the orange orchard, and the truck gardening section offered an opportunity for men of moderate means to become independent. So, in Kansas, where basically they were really hitting up people, the company said that it had sold lands to, quote, 5,000 men with families, 65% of which are Kansans. And also report again that this Providence City railroad was being built and expected to be completed in January of 1911. So now we've gone from, December of 1910, December of 1909 pretty much to January of 1911. So it's looked pretty much over a year, but hey, they still tell you things are happening. Every so often. In August of 1910, the Ladies' Aid had a successful social and was planning a chicken supper with fried chicken and chicken pie at the community hall. Dennis, have you ever had chicken pie? I guess we must have. In September of 1910, an officer of the company announced that the road had been financed and would be completed as soon as weather and conditions permit. Work will commence on the 15th of this month, that's September, and the graders will be started by the 1st. So once again, they're going on and on about the date. So in the, this is the most detailed item that would appear in the Journal of Railroads, basically, on the promise of the Gold Coast and Providence City. So notice it shows a nice map, but I want you to notice that it goes all the way to Smithville, and all the way down to Velasco. So first thing they do is not only just are we going to go between Pierce or El Campo and Providence City, we're going to go all these other areas too, right? Because more is better. And notice they always already have a little tag in the window. They call themselves the Providence Ground. You always have that kind of little tagline for your railroad, and that's what they're going to call this one. So there's the officers that were elected. And of course, here's the sales pitch at the bottom, right? Longest route of thousands of the best farm, truck, and garden lands in the Gulf Coast. Although if you ask any of the locals there, they would have sorely disagreed. Basically, what it was good for was raising price. Some melons, and something that things that we're going to try to raise here probably weren't going to do as well without a generous application of fertilizer and some TLC. The soil and climate is pronounced by experts, or paid for by the company, to be particularly adapted to the culture of Satsuma oranges, magnolia figs, and Honduras and Japanese rice. And they're right about the last one. The rice did pretty well right. So there's the pitch. Notice they have the New York Texas Mexican Pierce, and then they have the Galford and the SADP at Hallettsville. Of course, they're going to cross needed like 20, so it's like 20 would have 3 railroads, and then go over to Smithville, so Smithville would have 2 railroads, including 13 Texas. All of a sudden that becomes their plan, and that's what's published, in the official guide of railroads. So this is the 1911 edition. So on January 6, 1911, they reported that 7 miles of road had been graded, and the first shipment of steel rails was expected around June, followed by regular scheduled running of trains 2 months later. So now they're saying August of 1911 is when the railroad's going to be running. Okay. Mr. Parker basically said there was also an ice plant under construction, and that a local cannery capable of handling 1,000 acres of figs would be completed in the summer. He mentioned that an electric generating plant was in the near works, and that 35 families would live in tents until their homes could be built. In April, they reported that a Kansas City firm was testing the clay for suitability for sustainability in making bricks. So they're trying to track all this business stuff. They're doing the right thing in terms of tracking industry, in addition to agriculture, because they want, again, that full blown. So in late March, the Eagle Lake Headlight reported that a gentleman, Mr. Cole Hopkins of Providence City, said that the work continued on the railway, but progress was very slow. The right-of-way had been graded as far as Sandy Creek, but no rails had been installed. By July, we have Frederick Schilling, who sounds like a mouthpiece for the Providence City Land Company, who says that the railroad is, quote, practically assured. The railroad right-of-way had been cleared for 12 miles, and several miles of grading had been completed. In September, okay, now remember, the railroad was supposed to already be running by August, right? So September 1911, the Providence City Times, the local newspaper, said that the railroad camp was moving over to Glen Flora, which is on Santa Fe, to begin construction from that towards the city. They hadn't completed whatever they started the first time, but now they're going to move over and start something else, right? And he also said that grade had been completed 12 miles east of town, and 14 miles of work remained before the laying of rails. So by the time we get to the mid-September, a resident says, the railway to Glen Flora is assuming shape more and more. The worst part of the route has been graded through 12 miles of sandy bottom land. 6 miles remain to be graded, and it will be easier as it's over smooth prairie. So we're still pumping along. Now we get into this Home Finder. So this was a magazine published by the Provident Land Company, and would go out and they'd take photos and they'd show you, and it's what they would show to the Kansas residents here. Don't you want to come be part of this? Look what's going on here. There's the newspaper office up on the left-hand side. There's Mr. Henry Gunther's home under construction, lower left. On the right hand, there's the resident Murray Bossart, resident Corey King up in the right-hand corner, and there's all these houses in the middle. This one here, there are several reports of concrete houses. This may have actually been one. This looks most like a concrete house that was built. That was kind of a new phenomenon, you know, to build some concrete. Of course, in hurricane season, that was probably a nice thing. But what people were worried about was all the damage that you're going to have with the concrete getting cold and hot and stuff. So I took an actual picture one with the way the rough terrain. This looks like that might be one of the houses. And of course, they're showing. Look, there's this guy has an orchard and he has peanuts between the rows of his trees. And then here's the crop peanuts. And they did report in the newspaper that the peanut crop is doing good. So from a business perspective, Providence City reached its peak in the second half of 1911 and mid-1912. There were 3 general stores, 2 blacksmiths, a harnesser, a restaurant, a wholesale store, a furniture store, undertaker, a cigar store and pool hall, a saloon, a men's furnishing shop with a tailor, a hotel, a cannery, a bank, a post office, and a newspaper. So they had 104 pupils enrolled in the school, and they were issuing a bond to construct the school building. And of course, they formed the cemetery association. So, you know, they're firing on all cylinders. Now, this is the 1912 edition of the Forest Manual of Railroads, and the bottom is the Railroad Equipment Registry. Of course, what these publish is pretty much what you send them. I don't know if they really do any validation at all. Because I want you to notice that it says, here it is, chartered in 1910, unto all success, Executive Smithville of Alaska, of which 31 miles are completed. 31 miles are completed. Interesting, okay? We haven't seen that in the newspaper. Last reports we heard, they're still grading. We know it's not even rails anymore. No same thing down here. Miles of road. This one says it's an operation, not just completed. 35 miles of operation. This is just misinformation, which is just an error, you know. But this is what they're telling the industry. The roads are telling, hey, look, we've got this going on there. But apparently nobody there would probably check, or they would go out there and see it. And of course, once they were actually going to issue, basically show the state that the road was completed, the state would have to send an inspector. And of course, no inspector from the state ever went because they never told the state that they finished this, because the state said, well, why don't you send the inspector? Well, not yet. So clearly, in my opinion, this is just their kind of front to say, hey, look, things are happening, we're moving along. So the most significant indication that all was not well to anybody who wasn't living in Providence City was this following article in the May 7th, 1911 edition of the Allison New Era. The following suits were filed by Townsend, Quinn, and Townsend, Providence State Bank versus the Gulf Coast and Providence City Railway Company. That's a big red flag. Second, all the parties entered suit against the Provident Land Company and Louis Skurlock, trustee, for breach of contract. And there's a whole bunch of names here. So the bank sued the railroad company for failure to make any payments on a $2,000 promissory note dated April 1911, with the first payment due 4 months later. When the suit was filed in April 1912, no payments had been received. The court ruled that the railroad company owed the bank $2,402.38. All the parties in the lawsuit against the land company claimed they never received a title to their property despite having paid in full. Okay. Here's when you start to see that this is probably not quite on the up and up. They didn't know it before now. The locals have been telling you pay too much for your land, and that's what the Providence City Land Company starts saying is, go listen to locals. They don't like foreigners. They don't like newcomers. They don't like the people from Kansas, right? So they're going to like you. They're going to tell you that this land is terrible. You know, locals like to know the difference. So they would try to tell people, don't try to get your money back. You've been swindled. You know. Anyway, things kind of went on. The way that it had gone on, there was a July 4th picnic, well attended. There was a grand barbecue on July the 20th, 1912. It had food, refreshments, a grand ball, a baseball game, and other entertainment for free. Okay, but no news about the railroad. Schlafly, who was the chief engineer, was reported as making some kind of optical survey on a route from Providence City to Smithville. He was in the Hallettsville area. But he wouldn't say anything about the actual railroad, any progress on the railroad. He said nothing. So the Hallettsville Herald was even more cynical when they heard about this going to Alaska and going to Smithville. They said they still have quite a job on their hands even as far as Providence City. The grade is 6 or 8 miles from that place en route from Glen, Florida. In September of 1912, there was a meeting, an annual meeting of the Gulf Coast and Providence City Railroad. They basically said construction's still underway. There's a small gap between Providence City and Waterhouse, which is in Florida. They're building on it now, and it won't be long before this entire road will be completed. We're going to amend our charter at an early date to go from Providence City through Lavaca County and Hallettsville, and basically all the extensions they showed in the map there. Now, that came from the Hallettsville Herald. The Matagorda County Tribune, who I think attended the same meeting, had an entirely different take on this. They said that the Gulf Coast and Providence City Railroad had been, quote, taken over in a new company formed that was going to take over the charter of the old company. They were convinced that that was a good thing because El Campo would actually get the railroad, the second railroad they were looking for. And of course, the usual promises, yeah, the money's here, we're gonna go from Smithville to Velasco and in due time. So that was really the last of all the updates that were in the newspaper. Of course, the home line, the mouthpiece for the Provident Land Company, here's the important point. The South Texas farmer can always raise 2, sometimes 3 or 4 crops in a single year. Where the northern farmer is still frozen in, the crops here are half grown. When the northern farmer starts to plow, the Gulf Coast farmer is harvesting his first crop and getting the high prices that early crops bring. So that was their scope. Come down here, you can just farm all year long and make 3 or 4 times your money. So the guy I talked about, this is where they talk about the great constructed. Here's what you start seeing in the newspapers in around 1914-15. For exchange, 10 acres near Providence City for livestock, has 500 fig trees, care of G.B. Johnson, Seabrook, Texas. This is not a good sign when you start see people who invest in Providence City are trying to find a way out. That was April 1914. We'll trade for anything of equal value, $110 equity, 10 acres, Providence City, Colony, Texas. Balance due 2 notes, $95 each. Make an offer. That's in May of 1940. Spend your vacation in Providence City, Texas. Cool, comfortable, restful country life. A beautiful spot. Can accommodate 15. Rates $10 per week in the city tourists. So this is July of 1950. So now it's not come live here; it's come make this your destination for a week, and get away from the city. Finally, the big, again, if you were still kind of sleepwalking and all this didn't raise your alarm, in December of 1914, a sheriff's sale was ordered in Lavaca County as a result of a lawsuit against Lou Scurlock and the Provident Land Company. Basically, they found a judgment against Scurlock for $10,540 plus court costs. And the sale was set for January 5th, 1915, and 750 acres were sold for $4,000, or $3 per acre. That was pretty much the going price. Not the $30 or $40 per acre that the Provident Land Company was getting for. So pretty much, again, if you didn't know by now and you read the newspaper, you know that this is probably not on the up and up. So they still, though, keep the facade up. Here's the 1913-14 just for the Forest Manual Railroads. Notice they're still saying, hey, 31 miles of road in place, right? In both of these, they're completed. These don't say this road. This is still in 13 and 14. By 1915, all you saw in the Forest Manual Railroads was Providence City, Gulf Coast of Providence City, it said out of business. And that's pretty much the only real, that was the last little deal. No other, nothing else. Nothing in the newspaper, everything kind of went quiet, right? That's actually the Providence City Hotel. That's what actually survives today. It became a ranch headquarters. It was bought by a gentleman who actually already owned property in the area, and as people started leaving and property selling, he basically bought it from Scurlock, and because the land would go back to the company, and he basically bought it from them and made a lot of his ranch headquarters. This gentleman interviewed Louis Scurlock, who apparently had actually left the company like in 1913. Basically because 2 of his partners voted themselves the same salary as him, even though he was president of the company, and they knew nothing about the business, and they wouldn't finance the railroads. He kind of put all the blame on the other guys that, hey, we could have made this thing happen. We were going to build for the master plan community, but it didn't work out. So, I guess kind of the question is, would the railroad itself have made a lot of difference in Providence City? I think yes, initially. But we know a lot of places that are along active railroad tracks that are ghost towns. So that's just having the railroad is not going to guarantee you have a permanent community. I think if electric light plant, if the ice plant, if their whole scheme about, canning had gone, Providence City probably would have prospered. Now, who knows how much will be left today because, all the changes in demographics around World War I, World War II, people moving from rural areas. And again, farming was kind of on the way out. People didn't want that kind of work. I'll work in a sweatshop, but I'm not going to work out in the field. It's kind of being there. So the Gulf Coast Providence City is the railroad that wasn't. Okay, I'm going to change hats here. Talk about a railroad that was. Jim Kern. So I know one guy here knows where Jim Kern is. I knew nothing about Jim Kern, Texas. When I tried to look in the Handbook of Texas online, I did this like 10 years ago. I had this ticket, okay, from Wichita Falls, Rayburn, Fort Worth. So I know Jim Kern's on the railroad because I got a ticket that says I can get to Dublin, Texas from Jim Kern, Texas. I have no idea where Jim Kern is. Of course, the ticket doesn't tell me how far away that is, right? So I thought one day when I came across this, I need to look and find out where Jim Kern is. Well, I did the Google search, right? Couldn't find anything. I searched all kinds, but couldn't find anything. And I tried searching Jim Kern as 2 words, as 1 word, and couldn't find a lot of anything on the internet. And so finally, I accept on the Handbook of Texas online. This is what it said. Northern Stevens County became a post office and a station on the Wichita Falls and Southern in 1920, but did not survive long after the first flood of the Region Oil Boom. In 1926, its post office was closed. Okay. Well, that's somewhat correct. It actually was on the Wichita Falls, Rayburn, Fort Worth, which later became a part of Wichita Falls and Southern. But it was really, in a way, it's different from Providence City in the fact that this was not an agricultural kind of land swindle. This was people in search of, I want to get rich because it's oily. So this is a whole different driving force for the demographics that are swarming in Stevens County, Texas, in the oil boom, right? And so this just happened to be one of the towns that was there. So yes, there were oil explorations, in the Ranger, Breckenridge, and Desdemona oil fields, with a streak of product activity beginning in 1916 and became a full-blown boom by 1920. The population of Stevens County was 15,303 in 1926. It's been estimated at 40,000 by January 1921, but half of those people in Breckenridge. So I mean, we have people coming in from all over. People are literally it's like the California Gold Rush, just rushing to Stevens County. I want to get in on the ground floor. And some of them weren't actually in search of oil. They wanted like open a Rayburn store and make money. That's where you make all the money. All the people that are coming in, you find some way to make money and like open a Rayburn store. So a lot of them are after that. So Breckenridge proclaimed itself as the hub of the oil fields, but before 1920, it didn't have any railroad service. In fact, the only service in Stevens County was a little sliver of the Texas Pacific that had come through in 1880. So there's an opportunity here to provide transportation, and that's kind of what happened. So I'm not going to give you the history of these railroads that came through, but I'm going to show you that a bunch of these came through in a short period of time. Wichita Falls, Ranger, and Fort Worth was going to go from Dublin to Breckenridge, and it reached Breckenridge in June of 1920. Cisco Northeastern built from Cisco, Texas, and completed the Parks Camp in Stevens County and reached Breckenridge in October of 1920. The Eastern Wichita Falls and Gulf, which was chartered as the Ringwood Eastern Gulf, was going to go from 96 miles from May and Brown County to Newcastle and reach Breckwalker in November 1920, where it connected with the Wichita Falls Ranger and Fort Worth. And finally, this last one, Wichita Falls and Southern, which was incorporated to extend the Wichita Falls and Southern Railway through Newcastle Breckenridge. So all of a sudden, in 1920, Breckenridge, which doesn't have any railroads, all of a sudden has 4 of them, trying to come in and provide service. So it's that kind of railroad. So the kind of railroad rich. So here's the Wichita Falls, Ranger, and Fort Worth on the left, the Wichita Falls and Southern on the right. Both of these are going to be, we're going to be building towards Breckenridge, one from the south and one from the north. And so on the time on the left, you notice that the Dublin is milepost 0 is at the top, and then Breckenridge is milepost 66.5, and it has connections with the Frisco and the MK&T at Dublin and at the Texas Pacific at Ranger. And then Jake Heyman was it's quite a character. If you get a chance to Google him, there's a lot more about Jake Heyman I can tell you here, but he was quite a mover and a shaker, and basically he was murdered by his mistress. So I mean, there's lots of the story there that I don't have time to tell you here, but he was a mover and shaker out of Ardmore. This is not his first railroad. He actually was partnered with John Ringman when he built the Greenland line in Oklahoma. So this is kind of a second deal with him. Frank Hell, who was from the area, and was involved in other railroads. PJ Neff, and notice the names here on. We've got Neff, and of course we've got PJ Neff, so it's named after him. We've got Jay Kamen, okay, there's Jay Kamen. A lot of these big enough towns. Ed Hobby was on the board. Edwin Hobby, he's on the board there. Frank Taylor, who's also mentioned over here. This guy's on the board, Brett Walker, but he was a very, very rich man. He started rich in cattle, and then he sold us cattle and became more rich in actually an oil field. And he was a big rich guy, mover and shaker. But the interesting thing about Brett Walker, his full name is Breckenridge Stevens Walker. He was named after the city and county of his birth, Breckenridge, Texas, in Stevens County, Texas. Breckenridge Stevens Walker. So we have a town named after a guy who was named after a town. Can't say that enough too many people. So on the right side, we have the Wichita Falls and Southern. Again, you have Jack Kemp, another familiar name from that area because he was very involved in railroad, and also knows Frank Kells as his general manager then. He's also vice president of Wichita Falls Ranger in Fort Worth. So it goes from Wichita Falls down to Newcastle, and then it's going to extend down towards Breckenridge. That's kind of the line here. So the Ranger line, what they call the Heyman line, after Jay Heyman, was building northward, and the Wichita Falls and Southern was building southward. Both of these are the earliest timetables I could find in 1920 to show what their progress was. So they filed an application. They were going to Wichita Falls and Southern to construct from Newcastle, Grand, South Bend, Eliasville, or alternatively from Newcastle to Jim Kern. This is the first one mentioned of Jim Kern. If the Heyman line would provide trackage rights all the way to Breckenridge. So they built all the way to Breckenridge if they had to, but they would rather get trackage rights and not have to build the entire way. So the Heyman line was already laying track to Jim Kern, but they wanted trackage rights. They said, I'm not just going to give you access to Wichita Falls and Southern. What I want from you is some kind of agreement so I can use your tracks and serve northward, and you can use some of my tracks to get south to Breckenridge. And that's what basically eventually happened. And so they were going to basically do some trackage training. This is how we know kind of that Jim Kern is somewhere between Newcastle and Breckenridge. So where was it? Here's a map from 1921 that shows all those little black lines are pumping oil wells. All the hollow circles are wells that are drilled that they're expecting to. So you can see, Stevens County really is kind of the hub of the oil fields. But Jim Kern is actually shown right there. That's Jim Kern. So right along here's the line of Wichita Falls and Southern going south, and then south of here, down to Breckenridge is the Wichita Falls Ranger and Fort Worth. And they show some of the other railroad lines in there. That's where Jim Kern, Texas was. So I tried to look on a satellite map today to try to find it. I also talked to a gentleman named Rusty Robertson. His family lived in Frisco Falls, which is about 3 miles northwest of Jim Kern. His family was in cattle ranching. They used to ship cattle out of Jim Kern, Texas. So he kind of knew the area and stuff. And he basically told me, he says, I saw on this map, this is like a right. It shows Jim Kern to the left of the rail line. This is again, Wichita Falls and Southern. This is the Wichita Falls Ranger and Fort Worth. But he said that actually Jim Kern was on the east side of the railroad. So I found this satellite map, and I drew a little red line so you can see, but that's the rail line, as it was. And this area, the yellow box, is where Rusty Robertson said probably where Jim Kern was. When you look in the satellite today, there's literally no trace of anything in that area. What there is, and you can't see this on this picture, but I'm going to show you in a minute, about right here are stop pins. And there they are. Here's the stop pins. And so the rail line was moving out right here. So that's where Rusty Robertson said that his family shipped cattle out of Jim Kern all the way until the Wichita Falls Southern abandoned the line in 1954. So that's the only real trace you have of anything left in Jim Kern, Texas. There's more modern structure out there today, but you can look on the satellites and you don't see anything left there. And of course, it was a town that was kind of, in some ways, it was even less permanent than Providence City because people are throwing up tents, and everything, just trying to get out of the weather. So how did it get its name? There it is. Here's a promotion. Okay, October the 1st, 1920. This is the Breckenridge American, the newest town in Texas, in the heart of the Stevens County oil field. And of course, you have a stork delivering a newborn baby, and of course, it says named after President Jim Kern of the Frisco Railroad. So that's who it's named after. Notice it says lot prices are quote reasonably priced and not the usual oil field prices, which means we're not going to hold you nearly as bad as we should. Prices range from $10 for a residence lot to $2,000 for the best lot in town, 20% down and 8 installments. One corner lot sold for $3,500. That was a lot of money in 1925. So somebody really, somebody that really thinks they're going to make their money. They're either building a hotel or hardware store or something where they think they're going to recoup their investment. So the rails were 6 miles south of Jim Kern in February 15th. Some right-of-way had to be repaired because there was a recent rainstorm. The Haman line had a freight train that operated from Breckenridge to Jim Kern on March the 2nd. The agent was installed in that town on March the 2nd, in March the 4th, and they mentioned the name G.J. Connell, which was probably the first agent at Jim Kern. Then there was a town warming dance held in the evening of March 8th, attended by local residents and both several railroad men. There was a passenger excursion train from Ranger that carried 191 instant purchase to the town site on the 13th. The March 11th, the progress reports that the Haman Line roadmaster A. Martin visited Jim Kern and estimated 300 to 400 people, and that 1/3 of the lots had been sold. He was further quoted as saying that 15 shacks had been put up and one better building constructed with other buildings that was ready to build. So people are just coming there and living in tents, you know, kind of the same way as Providence City when they couldn't get all the building materials. So you have people just swarming into the air. So here's the first timetable that lists Jim Kern. This is the 21 edition of the Official Guide of Railways. It also appeared in the Rayburn American. And so I want you to notice that previously, Dublin was milepost 0. Notice here that Jim Kern is milepost 0. This kind of is in line with a quote rumor that was posted in the newspaper that they were actually going to make Jim Kern the site of their shops. They're going to build a railroad shop in Jim Kern. So it kind of makes sense that that's your milepost 0 if that's what you're going to do. This is the only addition I found where actually, you know, they showed. Notice that they have the oil field specials, which are these vestibule trains that were basically in connection with the Frisco line. And so they were operating those in connection. Look how many trains they have, you know, between Breckenridge and Ranger. You know, there's 8 trains there that go between those points, and then 2 trains that go from Jim Kern all the way to Fort Worth. So a lot of activity, you know, a lot of people coming and going, so they've got, you know, a lot of trains moving in and out. From just a year ago when they had no trains at all. So on March 20, 1921, Mrs. J. Kamen, and that's key there. Why is Miss J. Kamen, along with her son, Jay Jr., who's 18, why is she visiting this? Well, that's because Jay Kamen had already been murdered by his mistress. So she actually became vice president of the railroad company. So that's why she's doing the official townside visit and not Jay Kamen himself. They support she rode on the locomotive, and the train also pulled 9 freight cars. So she had to take quite the view. Of course, Jim Kern's got a baseball team. Well, Providence City has one. Why couldn't Jim Kern have one, right? You know, and it was ready to meet contestants from neighboring towns. It also had a first-class diamond in the ballpark, and the inaugural game was May the 1st. Also noted were 8 new derricks in the town. So if you're in a town that's in the oil boom, you want new derricks, right? Because that shows there's new activity. So that was all very positive. By May 14th, it was receiving an average of 10 freight cars a day from Breckenridge, mostly getting casing, boilers, and other heavy oil field equipment. And Mr. J. White installed an electric light plant consisting of a 15 horsepower generator and 56 storage batteries to provide 24-hour service. Accordingly, the Booster Club ordered 12 ornamental street lamps for installation in the 4 block business district. So how cosmopolitan. Something that Providence City never had was electric lighting. Jim Kern got it. You know. Of course, it is, you know, about a decade later. Here's actually one of the pictures of Jim Kern. There was a gentleman named Basil Clemens who was a traveling photographer. He ended up staying in the Stevens County for decades. He took photographs all over the area. And so, notice the date is 3/13/1921. So this is the date of that excursion that went to Jim Kern that we heard about where people were out there. So notice the people I want to typically call your attention to. Here's some of the tents in the background. And some buildings, and there's another tent over here. And then here's the grocery store. You see the barber clothes and barber shop. There's some lumber, you know, just waiting, got in a horse and a carriage. Lots of people milling about, so they're all excited about, you know, this field here, being the site of the new town. Rusty Robertson's family told us seeing business having wooden storefront facades with tents behind them, including a movie theater. So this is your way to actually put a quick storefront, and then, you know, you can't go to the rest of the building so fast, so you put a tent behind it, and then hopefully at some point you get more permanent stuff. But that's the rate of change that was happening over in Jim Kern. His collection, a lot of Basil Clemens' collection, he took tens of thousands of photographs, a lot of them. In fact, that became a problem when he died. There was, of course, a fight over his collection. It ended up at the Eurotakes of Arlington. The trouble was, like this one in this photograph, he has labeled, what it is, right? Not every photograph, in fact, most photographs aren't labeled. He apparently kept a notebook and would put a number on all the photographs, but the notebook didn't survive along the collection. So people were trying to figure out, for any photograph that's not labeled, where that actually happened, and for a lot of them, there's just no way to tell. So, we were lucky that they found a couple of them for Jim Kern that were actually labeled, otherwise we probably wouldn't know which ones. Because there were so many towns, South Bend, Eliasville, other towns going just like this, so this kind of activity was happening all over Stevens County, so it'd be impossible to say, where that actually was. Here's another view, some people in motor cars, again, 3/13/1921. Notice we have the town side office here on the left. And then here's Jack and Joe's Cafe, that's the hotel right there, so you see the kids in the car, and so I guess Daddy's probably invested some hard money into the Stevens open account strike bridge. So Jim Kern just kind of came up out of the ground, it's moving right along, there's people in town, there's businesses in town, and things are happening. I mentioned about his wife taking over J. King after he died, but Frank Ketch became the manager of the Haven Interest and president of the railroad. Frank Kell no longer appears as an officer, he was the vice president, and she's listed, his wife was instead, as long as several other adjustments in there. So there was that management change. And this is really what kind of led to the fact that when they were trying to establish this meeting point, neither railroad wanted to commit to where they were going to meet. Basically, Wichita Falls and Southern saying, well, I don't want to build further south in Eliasville, and the Haman line says, well, I don't want to build farther with the Jim Kern, that's a 20-mile gap. This ended up going before the Railroad Commission, who basically said, you guys are going to basically meet at some point, right, and they didn't actually establish a meeting point, but then you're going to get track and price facilities so you can each serve, some of the tracks. So the Haman line's already at Jim Kern, Wichita Falls and Southern still going south. The trouble is they're both using the same contractor, and he can't work on two railroads at once. So he's finished the part on the Haman line, on the south of Breckenridge, and now that he's finished up, he can start laying the tracks south to Jim Kern from the north. So now he is available to do that. So now they're going to start working on that. They reached Graham, Texas, began passenger service in May of 1921. They were building there's a bridge had to build south of there, and they graded to Eliasville. There was a big celebration on the 4th of July. And then they say that the grading had been completed to Jim Kern by the end of July, and that on about August 15th is when they predicted that you would have full connection all the way through Jim Kern, to north and south, right? So they said August 15th, and actually, it happened on August 18th. There's the headline in the paper that they said the first train entering Breckenridge over the Kell and Haven railroads arrived here at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, according to a wire on the American received from Frank Kell at Wichita Falls. Connections were made Jim Kern yesterday evening at 6:45, and it was announced that regular service would be continued to Wichita Falls and Breckenridge. Basically, August 18th is when the first train entered from Wichita Falls, and it quoted said, engine number 900 with 3 passenger coaches rolled into Breckenridge from the north at 1:48 p.m. on August 19th. W.J. Burke, who is the superintendent for the Wichita Falls Southern, said that the passenger service would depart Wichita Falls at 7 a.m., arrive in Breckenridge at 1:05 p.m. and depart for the return trip at 2:30 p.m. And on the following Monday, you have a mixed train operate from Graham to Breckenridge and regular freight service in 2 to 3 weeks. So now Jim Kern, for better or for worse, has complete connections both north and south. Okay, you find out this is not always as good as you think it's going to be. So here is on December 26, 1921, the Haman line basically went to receivership after the contractor basically said, I need to foreclose because they haven't paid me all the money they owe me for constructing this railroad. And basically they appointed a receiver. They reported that Frank Ketch and J.W. Mitchell as receivers for the railroad. Here's the Wichita Falls, Ranger, and Fort Worth in 1922. Notice that we were just looking at 1921. So on May the 9th, they basically said, look, there's not all the demand for these 8 trains we're running, a day. Can we just go down to 2 trains a day, one train per direction? Basically, the commission basically said, yes, you can distribute trains 3, 4, 7, and 8. substitute one train each way daily, and they ended up sticking with 3 and 4, because of lack of business, that was the cause. And, so that's what you see is this timetable, just a year after the other timetable. So what that shows you is that all these people were flushing in, but of course we have two problems. One thing is the oil, as you're depleting this oil field, all these wells are going dry because of the depth that they're being drilled at. And so the pool is getting smaller. And so people are moving on. So people aren't staying in one place long enough to live in it forever to become a town. And that's kind of what's the victim with Jim Kern is that, you know, if you're at the end of the line, or if you're at the end of the line on the point, you're kind of the point where all that transportation comes to you on the railroad. If you're just a transfer point on the railroad that goes somewhere else, and the oil fields are moving, well, guess what? People aren't going to stick around unless there's a business or some other employment way to keep them there. And there just wasn't that in Jim Kern. It flashed up out of the ground. You know, hotel had a cafe, had a barbershop and stuff, but no real big industry. They were depending on the railroad for that. And when the receivership happened, well, of course, you notice also on this that Dublin is now Mile Zero again, right? So Jim Kern is no longer Mile Zero, so any chance of this railroad that's going to build shops there isn't going to happen. You're not going to have all these railroad guys moving in any permanent industry. So that kind of was the death knell for Jim Kern. But it was part of a bigger, just kind of a bigger scheme. So Frank Kell in 1923 filed suit against the state of Jay Heyman to cover money from the settlement that he and Kell had made with the construction, that's Maney Brothers, when they filed suit. As a part of that, Kell stated that he and Jake Heyman had organized the Wichita Falls, Ranger, and Fort Worth as partners, but that a disagreement caused Heyman to take over Kell's interest, and that's kind of why you see Kell's name disappear from the officer list on that railroad. So the receivership lasted until 1926, and it was purchased by the Wichita Falls and Southern Railroad, and then the state of Texas basically approved a bill authorizing the Wichita Falls and Southern Railroad to acquire that Wichita Falls and Southern Railroad Company and the Wichita Falls Ranger and Fort Worth and operate them as one railroad. So while this name, the Wichita Falls Ranger and Fort Worth, appeared, it continued to appear on paper, it was merged in the parent company in 1940. And so it actually ceased as an independent entity in 1927. So what about this guy, James Kern, who was named for? This actually is from the photograph on the left is 1911 when he worked for the Santa Fe. He was the general superintendent of the Western Lines. The bottom was in 1932, right before the Frisco went to receive the King Sherman Frisco lines at that point in time. And so in the italics here, it basically appeared in the 1919 edition of the Santa Fe magazine, saying that this guy who was one of their own, you know, he had been a former employee, a well-respected employee of the Santa Fe Railroad, is now the chairman of the Frisco lines, you know, and so they were very proud of their former protege because they were still going to have goods, and then they said, you know, we're congratulations to Jim Kern, you know, on the job well done. You know, he was a great employee, worked for the Santa Fe, and we look forward to working with him as he chairs Frisco. Well, so at that point, July 1st, 1918, he was in Frisco. You know, we're already in the World War I U.S. area, so it was a very challenging job ahead of him at that point in time when he was appointed. So he basically became president on March 1st, 1920, after the URSA era ended. He actually visited his namesake town on September the 23rd, 1920. So James Kern actually visited Jim Kern, Texas, alongside Jake Heyman. That was like, about 7 months before Jake Heyman was murdered. And he served as president until 1932 when the Frisco entered receivership, and he would still could serve as a receiver and trustee until his retirement. He died at age 74 in 1945. So there's James Kern through Jim Kern, Texas. So this is not actually Jim Kern. It's about 2 miles south of there. We're looking north towards Jim Kern, and John Berger, who was a railroad investor and a guy who helped rehabilitate railroads, took us from the back end of an inspection train in 1940. And so that kind of shows you what the area looked like. It pretty much all had kind of reverted back. None of those towns, Eliasville, South Bend, Jim Kern, Brett Walker, some of those never even developed, and most of them just pretty much disappeared. They just became names on the map. You still see them on timetables and every maps, but as far as communities, there was nothing to keep them around. As the oil started to play out, by the mid-1920s, people left Stevens County. And so what you ended up with at the end of all this is that Stevens County's population probably was only a couple of thousand more than it was in 1924 to oil boom. And all 4 of those railroads ended up, going out of business. And so you ended up with Breckenridge, who started off in 1919 with no railroads. By the end of World War II, you know, or really after the Wichita Falls and Southern, they abandoned that line to Breckenridge in 1954, but the Rock Island picked it up just to serve War Petroleum south of there. And so that line disappeared, you know, when the Rock Island line went out. And so at the end of the day, Breckenridge, you know, ended with no railroads, just like it started out. So you had this kind of, you know, quick change in the demographics, and I think the goal here is that when you look at the issues of what the railroads could have provided, you know, certainly in Jim Kern, the railroads did their part. You know, it's just the fact that what was driving the railroads there in terms of population stuff was not going to be sustainable for the long term. And so it's a case where let's get in and make this money while we can, and they did. But then when the business was gone, the railroads couldn't stick around and handle it. So it really took kind of the community effort in building the business and building a reason for people to kind of come and stay there for free to have any kind of longevity. That's pretty much the tale of two cities. Any questions I can answer?
Excellent presentation. Thank you, sir. We're just about ready for a lunch break. Everyone take just a moment and recognize some of the folks that helped make this thing possible. Our luncheon is being sponsored by the college that I chose to be part of Science and Engineering. Dr. Andrea Graham was our dean, and she was kind of department head before then, and I think I served on the community garden back in the day. And just colleague, Dr. Muller is joining us as well. I'm part of that. So they're sponsoring the luncheon. Appreciate that. And do so if we don't working hard. He's a sponsor as well as a presenter, so he's helping us out with that, and we appreciate that. And Tina, that's her last name. So, how's it pronounced? Savannah. Okay. She's a sponsor as well last year. When we lose people that have been very important to the Symposium and our efforts along the way, we would like to kind of honor them and give a little bit of recognition and dedicate the event to them. A while back, we lost Bill Bailey. Some of you remember him. He's chief mechanical officer on the restoration effort of late 19, when they made it run again, and several of us got to enjoy seeing those runs from Pine Bluff to the tower and down to back to the times. Y'all seen him, and Mom has been here since the very beginning, and here taking pictures for us, so that's how I managed to get pictures also photos. She just did that, but and her illness was discovered, I guess, back early in July, and we lost her last Sunday morning. So it was her. I've heard from a lot of you, her, and the family himself, which was kind of words. And with that, I believe we are not ready to eat. They're ready, so same place, same menu, a new improved price. The college is taking care of that, so we're good to go. We've been
enjoying the pictures. And actually, Joe was just up there, nothing before.